Hello fellow orchid lovers, it's Danielle here with the promised How I Rescue Phalaenopsis Orchids video. I did promise someone a couple weeks ago that I would do this. Seems to be a pattern with me. I do promise to make videos and then time flies by and before I know it a couple weeks has passed. So I do apologize again for the delay. But I have had some success with rescuing Phalaenopsis orchids. I'm not sure what your experience is as far as, when you get an orchid from the store, what kind of condition they're in. But my experience, unfortunately, is that most of the Phalaenopsis orchids that I get from the store are in pretty rough shape. For my local supermarket, I know the reason why is because they, in fact, do water the orchids with ice cubes. And I know some people do use that method, but there are consequences. They may not be immediate, but your plant is going to suffer. And I'll go over that in a minute towards the end of this video. But that's basically how I get these orchids in poor condition. A supermarket or a big box store is not a nursery, and so they really don't know how to take care of these. So depending on how long they are in their care, the orchid could be in semi-good shape or could be on the brink, which unfortunately many of them are on the brink. So I've had some experience with rescuing them. So as you can see, these are two examples of orchids that are in the need rescue stage of their lives. If you have a Phalaenopsis that has leaves that are doing this, this is a sign that the orchid is unhappy. This is a sign of dehydration. And if you look at the orchid, you'll see why. She has basically no roots. So this orchid, I got her, and she started to do a downward spiral pretty quickly. Her flower spike died, all of her roots turned mushy. Not just the ones that were in the water, just all of the roots in general started to turn mushy. So I removed the velamen and just left the root structure behind so she would have something with which to hydrate herself. She did, in fact, lose every single root she had. But as you can see, she's starting to put out some new roots. So she's on the road to recovery. She thinks now is time to push a leaf because it's, spring. I disagree with her. I think she should focus on roots, but she's never been very good at listening to me. So she's putting out some new roots. And again, the only thing really that this orchid had with which to hydrate herself was these roots. And in addition, in the past, when an orchid didn't even have these, which I'll show you that orchid in a minute, I had an orchid, I didn't know you could use this to hydrate the plant. So I used to cut the roots back all the way to the stem when they started to rot. And so one of the orchids that I rescued had not even this with which to help me. So I was soaking the stem, which you can do, but you need to exercise caution. So I would soak the stem, sorry about that. I would soak the stem for about 20 minutes, just the tip of the stem for about 20 minutes, and then take the orchid and, drain off the water. I would leave the water in the vase to provide humidity, but I wouldn't let the stem touch it for more than 20 minutes. I found since then that you can go a little longer than that, but you don't want to leave your orchid stem in water for that long because it will rot the stem. But if you have nothing to hydrate the plant, you can soak the stem for a short length of time, 15, 20 minutes, even a half an hour. It's not going to hurt the plants. You could even do it for longer than that, but again, please exercise caution. An orchid doesn't really, as long as the stem's getting saturated, it doesn't need to sit in the water for that long. Once something is saturated, it's not going to take on any more water. So, if you have an orchid that has absolutely not a root on it, not even these little pieces without the velamen, you can soak the stem to give it hydration. This is the orchid that I did that with. This one right here, this is my oldest orchid. I've had her for 2 years. She had nothing on her, no strands of roots with no velamen, nothing, just her stem. And that's the way that I saved her. So as you can see, she has 2 newer leaves. but as you can see, they're smaller. The structures are smaller. This is her newest, and it's slightly larger than her older one. Smaller structures, whether it's a new growth or a new leaf, depending on the orchid you have, show that the orchid is going through some stress. So this orchid, you know, evidently did go through some stress. Her leaves were in this condition just a few months ago. But since then, she's grown roots, again, using just the stem soaking method. Her leaves have firmed back up. She's grown 2 new leaves, and now she's putting out a flower spike for me. So it is possible to rescue an orchid from a condition like this. In addition, you may have noticed I have this little piece of cloth that I cut out. This type of cloth, I find it doesn't break down in the water. I was using paper towels, and one of my subscribers, you know, kindly recommended that I use this. It's like a microfiber cloth, and it does work. You know, I'll wrap it around one of the newer roots that can't quite reach the water and just let it hang into the water, and it will soak up the water and saturate the root. So that's how I'm working with her. Now I have another orchid that's been in this state for a long time. It went into this state around the same time that one did, and it's proving very hard to help to recover. I think there are some underlying issues with this orchid that I'm not even aware of. It did have a very strong smell of pesticides when I got it. It had obviously had some bug issues. So I think there are other things that are holding it back from recovering as quickly as this one did. So as you can see, it's still in a state of distress. Its leaves are probably about 4 times the size of this. Those have since dropped off. She has developed 3 new leaves, but they're very small, and now she's working on a 4th one. She does still have a few of her roots left remaining. As long as the velamen stays firm, I don't remove it. If it gets mushy and soggy and you can tell that it's rotting, I do remove it and I just leave the strands. But as long as the velamen stays firm, I just keep it on there. So she does have a few of her original roots left. And again, I do have the microfiber going down into the water to help hydrate some of her newer roots. As you can see, that root's almost ready to go into the water. So I'm hoping that once that root can hydrate her properly, she might start to bounce back. But again, both of these orchids are in a pretty sorry state, and I've had several who have been there. This one was there. As you can see, its smaller leaves give it away that this orchid went through some stress. But now look at her. She's gorgeous. Her leaves are firm and healthy. She has an abundance of new roots. So she has bounced back from this state just by using those methods I showed you. Whenever you have root loss, you have options. You can remove the velamen and just leave the strands of the roots down into the water. You can use a cloth to soak up the water to the roots that are too short to reach the water, or if the orchid has no roots at all, you can then soak the stem. That should be your last resort, but if an orchid has no roots, it's gonna die. So by attempting to soak the stem for a short period of time, if it kills the orchid was going to die anyways. So, it's kind of your last resort, but it is a method that does work. This orchid is proof. I also did the same thing with this orchid. This is my Harlequin orchid. Well, she went downhill real fast too. All of her roots died. She was unhappy as can be, and I soaked the bottom of her stem because she had no roots, and look at her now. Her leaves have perked back up. She's putting out another leaf. She has a ton of new roots growing. So it is possible to rescue orchids in this state by using those methods that I just showed you. Yeah, so it's actually kind of exciting that you can. It's relatively hard to kill a Phalaenopsis orchid. If you have a Phalaenopsis orchid that died and you don't know why, it's a very good chance that the orchid was sick, because it's relatively hard to kill them. And as long as you put the time in, relatively easy to save them. Granted, that one's been sitting in that state for almost a year now, but it's still alive and it's still trying. So, they are very resilient, hardy plants. You just kind of have to work with the way that they grow to help save them. Now, these orchids over here I wanted to share with you. If you watched my How I Grow Phalaenopsis Orchids in Water video, you'll remember this is one of the orchids I pointed to as going into a downward spiral. In that video, her leaves were all soft and leathery. Her flowers had all drooped. The buds had gotten stuck, you know, not opening. Do you notice something about this orchid since that video? Her flowers have perked back up. I have never, ever, ever seen an orchid do this. Ever. Did I say ever? Because I've never, ever seen an orchid do this. Once the flowers start to droop, in my experience, that's it. They're goners. So I'm pretty shocked at how this orchid bounced back. And I just want to apologize if I'm jerking the camera around. I have very shaky hands today. My doctor put me on a new medication and it's kind of making me a little shaky. So I'm sorry about that. So anyways, all of her flowers had drooped. Her leaves were drooping, and I told you all that she's going in a downward spiral and she's going to be the next one in that state of that orchid right there. I said, I know it. It's going to happen. Hello. She did not do that. Her flowers will bounce back. Her leaves are all hydrated and no longer, I mean, you hear that? Very firm. No problems, no softness, nothing. So what happened? How did that happen? Okay, I'm going to tell you. So she had long roots and they seemed okay. They seemed like they were firm. There were portions of them that were mushy and I removed them, but they seemed okay. So that's what I was putting down in the water because I don't like to overwhelm, especially a brand new orchid's roots with water because I don't know what those roots have been through. I don't know what kind of condition they're in. So typically, like this is an example of an orchid, new orchid that I have. I just put the water right down here and I leave most of the roots in the air. And as you can see, there's not even any water left in there. It's time for me to water this one. The roots are still green. So they don't need a whole lot of water in order for the plant to be hydrated properly. So I applied the same thought process to this orchid and she had roots all the way down here and I was just putting a little bit of water to hydrate those roots. Well, she started to go into a downward spiral. Her flowers started to droop, her leaves started to droop, and I said, you know what? Let me just put more water in the vase and see if I can hydrate her. And I did, and sure enough, boom. So those roots that I had down in the water, although they seemed healthy, were not bringing water to the plant. Now that I've cut them off and I have the water at a higher level, again, I'm only putting the roots that are in the water, only slightly in the water. I'm not drowning the poor thing because your roots need air. Don't forget that. Just that amount of water on those roots instead of the long ones has perked her right up. Her leaves have recovered. Her flower spike has recovered. And again, I've never seen flowers recover. I've only ever seen a Phalaenopsis flower shrivel and die. I've never seen a Phalaenopsis flower come back from a shriveled state. I'm mystified and extremely happy, but I don't know how that happened. I'll take it though, because I think these flowers are just gorgeous. I mean, look at that. The spots in the lip. I'm a sucker for spots. If you know me, you know I love spots. And she's got pink on the tips and just beautiful, beautiful flower. So I'm really glad they stuck around and that raising the water level and getting rid of those long roots helped. I mean, you can tell that it went through some stress. They're not as firm as, you know, usual orchid blooms are, but I mean, they were wilted. Go and look at my other video. They were wilted and they're back. So interesting. Just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so I want to have a brief conversation with you about why ice cubes are bad for your orchids, because I recently was watching, I like to look around on YouTube, especially when I'm not feeling good. You know, I'll lay down and I'll look around on YouTube for, you know, new people to follow and, you know, get ideas from and, you know, the orchid community is pretty cool on YouTube, I feel. And I came across a relatively new person on YouTube, and, you know, she lives in Florida and she grows her orchids outside, and she posted a video about growing Phalaenopsis orchids inside, which most of her videos are about growing orchids of all types outside. And, you know, she's giving care tips, and I'm listening and I'm nodding my head. And then all of a sudden she says, okay, so how do you water your Phalaenopsis orchids inside? And she goes, I know a lot of people are going to have a problem with this, but I put ice cubes. And I was like, no, don't tell people that. Because it's so bad for your orchids. And I know there are people out there that do it, and they've done it. She said she's been doing it for 2 years and she's never had a problem. And God bless her if that's true, but let me show you what happens to an orchid that you use ice cubes on. This is an orchid from my store, and we've already established my store puts ice cubes on their orchids. Okay, and I'm gonna show you why that's a no-no. You see this root right here? It's firm right here. But then as you, oh, look at that. Look at that. Now that's not a normal rotting root. It's rotting from the stem. It's rotting from where it was on top of the media. Now, if we just roll it slightly, do you see that darkness? You could see it better. I wish I hadn't wet the roots, but you could see it better when it was dry. It was silvery and it looked in, you know, good shape, but there was a burn mark on it. That's what a burned root looks like. Anyone that doesn't, you know, hasn't had an orchid with a burn mark, that's what it looks like. And that is because the store uses ice cubes to water their orchids. This is what ice cubes do to roots. Look at this. That's what an ice cube will do to your roots. Don't use ice cubes. I swear to you, it will come around and haunt you. Yeah, maybe a couple of years. If your orchid has really good roots, you using ice cold water on a tropical plant, you may get away with it for a little while, but I'm telling you right now, you're not going to have a plant that's as healthy as it could be. Look at this. It causes absolute destruction. Why not use just tepid water? Please don't use ice cubes. Please don't listen. Don't do it. And why is this a problem? Right? Why is this a problem? Look, the rest of the root's fine. That can hydrate the plant, right? Look at this. Let me put him back because I have limited space here. Okay, let me try to put him back. Don't fall. Please don't fall. Please don't fall. Okay. I've had this plant for a year. This plant had the best roots I've ever seen on a Phalaenopsis orchid in my life. I just would stare at them in just amazement. And then I noticed something. The tops of all of her roots were rotting. The bottoms were fine. The tops were all rotting. Why is that? Because, again, it came from a store where they put freezing cold ice cubes along the top of the media. And it killed that portion of the root. Again, look. This part of the root is fine. Is it hydrating the plant? Yes, that's not the point. The point is ice cubes kill roots. That's the point. So, yeah, it still has something to hydrate it, but is this plant as healthy as it should be? Well, you be the judge. Look at these leaves. They're still firm, but they're droopy. It's not getting enough. It's not getting enough hydration. It's alive. I'm not going to lose this plant, and it's going to stay alive for years. But look at what it did. Look at what the ice cubes did to this poor plant. It's droopy. It's not hydrating. It's growing new roots, so there's hope for it. But where do new roots grow out of the top of? The top of the plant, down into the media. So if you keep putting ice cubes on all the new roots that are coming out, what's going to eventually happen to this plant? It's going to die, and it's going to take years. You're going to have no problem for years. Yeah, your plant's not going to be as healthy as maybe some other people's Phalaenopsis, but it will still live. It'll still bloom. It'll still grow leaves, but it's going to eventually die because you keep killing the roots. Look, this is one of her newer leaves. It's tiny compared to her other leaves. This is a sign of stress. She still has roots. She's still hydrating, but they were damaged because of the ice cubes. So can you use ice cubes to water your orchids? Sure. Is it going to kill your orchids right away? Probably not. But are you going to have healthy orchids? Absolutely not. And you may kill them. If you want to take that risk, dealer's choice. But personally, I'm looking for ways to save my orchids, not ways to kill them. So, again, everything that you see on the internet, take it with a grain of salt. Try to use your powers of reason. Orchids are tropical plants for the most part. I mean, tropical is a relative term. But for the most part, extremes in temperature are not good for these plants. They don't grow here in New York in the wild. Well, there are some types of orchids that grow in the cold, but these types of orchids do not grow here in New York in the wild because it's just too darn cold. They can't tolerate it. They die. So doesn't that then make you realize that exposing them to the cold is going to make them die? If I took this orchid outside right now, it's not snowing. It's just, 30 degrees outside, but it's not snowing. How long do you think this orchid is going to live? Not long. What temperature is an ice cube? You do the math. Yeah, so anyways, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to turn that into a diatribe on why you shouldn't use ice cubes to water your orchids, but I did see that video recently, and I was so horrified that here's someone giving misinformation on the internet that you should be watering your orchids, your indoor orchids, with ice cubes. And again, you can, but the consequences aren't going to be pretty. And again, you may not see consequences right away, but I mean, look at my orchids. Look at this. You saw what that root did. I mean, it was squishy, came right away in my hand, is completely burnt. Why would you want to burn the roots of your orchids? Why wouldn't you just take the same amount of water in a tepid state and water your orchids? Why the ice cubes? Why? Just because someone told you to do it? There's an old saying about, would you jump off a bridge if someone told you to do it? No. So don't do everything people tell you to do. But anyway, so that's how I saved my Phalaenopsis orchids. And, I have had some pretty amazing success. I have my Phalaenopsis over here, my pride and joy. She's going to bloom for me. She's starting to develop her buds. So I'm really excited about that. So it is possible, to save orchids that are in a pretty sorry state because of how they've been handled, and bring them back from the brink and save them. And, so if you have any questions about my method, please let me know. I'm sure some of you will. And I hope that video was understandable. And I didn't go on too long about the whole ice cube thing. I don't know. Could you tell it was a pet peeve of mine? Yeah, it kind of is. So I hope everyone's well. And I hope that you continue to enjoy your week. And I will talk to you all next time.